Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So day 3 of spoiler season is finally here, and I have already finished my first cup of coffee, so I am ready to go. But if you didn't see my first episode from yesterday, make sure you check that one out, which is on the new Wish card, Wish. Also, make sure you check out my episode on Oswald Fiddlebender, which just might be the best mono white commander of all time. Yeah, this little gnome artificer with a strange name is pretty much a birthing pod in mono white, and that's pretty fantastic. And of course, make sure you don't miss my last episode from yesterday with Zalto Fire Giant Duke, who just wants to get hit. So deal him some damage, explore some dungeons, and have a lot of fun. But don't leave just yet, because make sure you watch this episode first on Orcus, Prince of Undeath. And while Orcus is all about undeath, your opponents are going to be very dead. Whatever, let's just jump into it. First off, a big thank you to MTG Goldfish for this translated version of the card. Anyways, Orcus Prince of Undeath is a 5/3 demon with Flample, that's flying and trample, that costs X2 black-red. It has, when it enters the battlefield, choose one. Each other creature gets -X until end of turn, you lose X life. Or return up to X target creature cards with total mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, they gain haste until end of turn. Now first off, a 5/3 with Flample for just 4 mana can already be really good. But of course, if we're building an entire deck around this commander, well, we really want to take advantage of that X. So if we need to, with enough mana, we can basically make this into a one-sided board wipe that might cost us some life, but yeah, it gets rid of basically everything except for this. A board wipe coming out of the command zone is always a fantastic option to have, but actually the other choice is most definitely what I would focus on. Again, let's read that one more time because the wording is pretty specific. Return up to X target creature cards with total mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, in a way, it's kind of like a more limited version of Nethroi. You not only have to keep in mind which creatures you want to bring back, but their total mana value, and make sure that you put enough into X to get those back. So if say you want to reanimate something that costs 2 mana and something else that costs 5 mana, well, it's going to cost you 7 mana in total. Even though you could technically target up to 7 creatures, well, it's going to have a total mana value of 7, so you can only get back those 2. So while that can be effective, it's not the most efficient because you're kind of in a way wasting targets. So in my opinion, the most efficient way is just to simplify things and have a lot of creatures that, well, just cost 1 mana. So then for every extra mana that we put into that X, we know that we're getting exactly 1 more creature. If we've got 7 creatures in our graveyard that have a mana value of 1, if we put 7 mana into X, we can get all of them back. So in this scenario, we're not wasting any targets, and we get a ton of value out of this by getting a lot of creatures back in the field. And of course, there are plenty of great 1-mana creatures out there in Rakdos, and there are plenty of ways to take advantage of those creatures as well. With the right setup, we can get a ton of creatures out into play, we can sacrifice them for a lot of value, and then get them back into play, and then sacrifice them again, and you see where this is going. So our opponents better not underestimate our small but mighty army. So let's jump into some cards and talk about some pieces of that army. First up, creatures like Blood Pet, Skirk Prospector, and Mirrormoon Vessel can be fantastic in this deck. Blood Pet is a simple 1/1 for a black mana that says sacrifice Blood Pet, add black to your mana pool. Again, getting creatures into our graveyard is not a bad thing. So we can utilize Blood Pet to cast other spells, or we can utilize it to actually pay for its own cost in the X on our commander to get it back. And the same can be said for Skirk Prospector and more, because Skirk Prospector can sacrifice any goblin to add a red. And then Mirrormoon Vessel is a 1/1 mirror for 1 that says when it's put into a graveyard from play, add colors to your mana pool. So while this can sacrifice itself, whenever it dies we get some mana, and we've got plenty of ways to, well, help it die. We'll get to those here in a bit though. Next up, let's talk about Impulsive Pilferer, which is a 1/1 goblin, and when it dies we get a treasure token, and on top of that it's got Encore for 3 and a red. So when this dies we essentially get its mana back in the form of a treasure token that we can utilize whenever we need to. And then Shambling Guest is another new card from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, a 1/1 zombie for a black that says when it dies choose 1. Brave the Stench, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn, or search the body, create a treasure token. So either of these can be effective, but generally we're going to be getting that treasure token. Again, this deck has a lot of ways to get value out of sacrificing creatures, and creatures that actually give us value on their own when they die are fantastic. Speaking of which, let's talk about Nested Shambler and Grim Initiate. Nested Shambler is a 1/1 zombie for a black that says when it dies, create X tapped 1/1 green scroll creature tokens where X is Nested Shambler's power. Now, the vast majority of the time, this is just going to be 1 token, but still, 1 mana for 2 bodies is pretty great. So, Grim Initiate can also help us out in that way. It's a 1/1 zombie warrior with first strike for a red that says when it dies, amass 1. And again, essentially when you amass if you don't have an army creature token, you get 1. Again, the more creatures that we get in play, the more that we can sacrifice for value. And speaking of value, let's talk about Eye Twitch, Insolent Neonate, and Eye Collector. Eye Twitch is a 1/1 flying eye bat, because that's a thing, for a black that says when it dies, learn. And for the purposes of the Commander format, learn is essentially rummage. So we discard a card and then draw a card, and yeah, discarding a creature card into our graveyard again is not a bad thing for this deck, because with our Commander we can just get it back and right into play. In a similar way, there's Insolent Neonate, a 1/1 vampire with menace for a red that says discard a card, sacrifice it, draw a card. So again, basically, sacrifice it to rummage. And then Eye Collector can help us out in a different way, a 1/1 fairy with flying for a black that says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. Or in other words, each player mills 1. And again, filling our graveyard with creatures is just another resource for us. But next up, let's talk about some high value 1-mana creatures with things like Archfiend's Vessel, Dragon Master Outcast, and Signal Pest. Archfiend's Vessel is a 1/1 human cleric with lifelink that costs a black, and it says when it enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, exile it. If you do, create a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying. So basically, if we use our commander to get this back, we're essentially just paying 1 mana to get it back, but instead of it coming back, we are getting a 5/5 flyer. And speaking of 5/5 flyers, there's Dragon Master Outcast, a 1/1 human shaman for a red that says, beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. For just 1 mana, the amount of value that this can provide us is absolutely absurd. And how about Signal Pest, a 0/1 pest that costs 1 that has Battle Cry? That means that whenever this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and on top of that, Signal Pest can't be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach. So although our army might be small, this can help us get a lot of extra damage in. And speaking of damage, if you want to spend a little extra money on a card, I'm talking about $10 or so, Cataract Parasite is a fantastic card for this deck. It's a 1/1 horror for a black that says whenever an opponent draws a card, if you control a red permanent, you may have Cataract Parasite deal 1 damage to that player. The vast majority of time with this deck, we're going to have a red permanent in play. So yeah, this is basically a 1 mana Underworld Dreams, and yeah, this can dish out a lot of damage throughout the game. And speaking of dishing out damage and taking out our opponents, some other cards that can be fantastic in this deck are ones that drain all of our opponents with things like Pulse Tracker, Mardu Shadowspear, and Night Market Lookout. Both Pulse Tracker and Mardu Shadowspear are 1/1s for just a black mana, and when they attack, each of our opponents loses 1 life. Now that might seem like a small amount, but it can really add up throughout the game, especially with all the other things that we're going to be doing. And then Night Market Lookout is somewhat similar. It's a 1/1 human rogue for a black that says whenever it becomes tapped, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So yeah, attacking with this would essentially do the exact same thing. Even a card like Maggot Carrier can be very impactful in this deck as well. It's a 1/1 zombie for a black, and when it enters the battlefield, each player loses 1 life. So this affects us as well, but we've got plenty of ways to gain that life back, and this is going to be just fine. And then Spear Spearer is a 0/2 Goblin Warrior Defender that costs a red, and we can tap it to deal 1 damage to each player. So again, this also pings us, but more importantly, it's taking our opponent's life totals down. Speaking of which, there's Serrated Scorpion, which is a 1/2 Scorpion that costs a black, and when it dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you gain 2 life. At just 1 mana, this is incredibly efficient, especially if we can keep sacrificing it and getting it back. And speaking of sacrifice, let's talk about some cards like Carrion Feeder, Viscera Seer, and Cabal Therapist. Carrion Feeder is a 1/1 that can't block, but you can sacrifice a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on it. So this is a free sacrifice out that can easily grow into a threat. And then Viscera Seer is a 1/1 vampire wizard that has sacrifice a creature, scry 1. So again, this is a free sacrifice outlet like Carrion Feeder, but in this case, we're actually getting some card selection out of it. Being able to freely sacrifice creatures is huge for an aristocrat-style deck like this that's looking to get a lot of value out of getting rid of creatures and getting them back. And then Cabal Therapist is another 1-mana creature that helps us out in a similar yet different way. It's a 1/1 with Menace that says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, choose a non-land card name, then target player reveals their hand and discards all cards with that name. So although we can't just freely sacrifice creatures with this, when we do get to sacrifice creatures, we can actually make players discard cards. Although we're probably going to miss on our first guess, after that we've got access to information on someone's hand. Regardless, I just want to highlight 2 other sacrifice outlets that cost 1 mana with Plague Rascala and Scorch Rascala. Plague Rascala has pay a black, sacrifice a creature, target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So this might not be a free sacrifice outlet, but it's still a pretty cheap one. And this can also help us utilize our creatures to take out our opponent's creatures too. And then Scorch Rascala helps out in a different way. It has pay a red, sacrifice a creature, Scorch Rascala deals 1 damage to target player. So this is just one of the many ways that we can take our opponent's life totals down and to take them out. But we're not quite done just yet in talking about sacrifice outlets and talking about ways to take our opponents out. So first up, let's highlight a fantastic sacrifice outlet for this deck that is unfortunately slightly out of budget, but let's still just bring it up real quick. Ashnod's Altar is an artifact for 3 that says sacrifice a creature, add colors to your mana pool. So now by sacrificing our 1-mana creatures, we essentially get more mana out of them than it takes to actually get them back with our commander. So we can effectively utilize our creatures to get themselves back and to ramp. But we've also got a much more budget-friendly outlet with Thermopod. Thermopod is a 4/3 and it has sacrifice a creature, add red to your mana pool. So this is kind of like Skirk Prospector, but for all creatures and not just goblins. So again, we can effectively have all of our 1-mana creatures pay for themselves to get them back with our commander. An outlet like this can really help us out throughout the game. Or how about a massive burst of mana with something like Mana Geyser? It's a sorcery for 3 red that says add red for each tap land your opponent's control. In a game of commander with 3 opponents, yeah, this is going to give us a ton of mana all at once. So yeah, with this we can probably get every single creature out of our graveyard back into play with our commander and probably have some extra mana left over. Now when it comes to finishing our opponents off, of course we're going to be utilizing things like Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat, and Bastion of Remembrance. Blood Artist says whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So yeah, with this deck again, we're going to be sacrificing an absurd amount of creatures so we can drain our opponents out really quickly with this. Speaking of which, Zulaport Cutthroat might be even more effective. It says whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then Bastion of Remembrance does the exact same thing, but it's an enchantment, and when it comes into play, we get a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So yeah, with any of these, or especially with multiple of these, we can drain our opponents out very quickly. Or, you know, we can just ping them to death with things like Impact Tremors and Cavalcade of Calamity. Impact Tremors says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. Again, we're planning on having a lot of creatures enter and leave and come back, so yeah, this can ping our opponents down really quickly. And then Cavalcade of Calamity helps out in a different way. It says whenever a creature you control with power 1 or less attacks, Cavalcade of Calamity deals 1 damage to the player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. The vast majority of creatures in this deck, again, are 1-mana creatures that fit that requirement. So pretty much whenever we attack with them, we're going to be pinging the opponent we're attacking. And we can also take advantage of their low power with Shirei, Shizo's Caretaker. It's a 2/2 spirit that says whenever a creature with power 1 or less is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may return that card to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step if Shirei, Shizo's Caretaker is still on the battlefield. Yeah, this very well might just be the golden pig of this deck. We sacrifice a ton of tiny creatures to drain our opponents and get a lot of value, and then they just come right back. And then next turn we do it again, and then the turn after that we do it again, and you see where this is going. Regardless, of course, we're also going to want ways to get our commander back as well with things like Erratic Portal and Blood Clock. Erratic Portal has pay 1 and tap, return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1. Obviously, if we're targeting our own commander with this, we're not going to be paying that 1. And then there's Blood Clock, which says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player returns a permanent they control to its owner's hand unless they pay 2 life. Again, repeatable ways to get our commander back can be fantastic in helping us recast our commander to get more creatures out of our graveyard to then, you know, take over the game and win. But outside of cards that can work really well in this deck, what other decks does Orcust actually want to be in itself? As Orcust is a demon, the very first commander that came to mind that might want it in the 99 is Rakdos the Showstopper. Rakdos is a 6/6 demon with Flample that costs 4 black-red. When it enters the battlefield, flip a coin for each creature that isn't a demon, devil, or imp, destroy each creature whose coin comes up tails. So yeah, Rakdos the Showstopper is basically a demon, devil, imp tribal deck, but mostly demon, so yeah, Orcust can fit right in. and it might even fit into a Kali of the Vast deck if that deck is focused on demons specifically. Kali of the Vast is a 2/2 human cleric with flying that costs 1 red, white, black. Whenever it attacks an opponent, you may put an angel, demon, or dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking that opponent. So again, this can be built in a lot of ways, whether that's angel tribal, demon tribal, or dragon tribal, or a mix of all of them, but if it's specifically demon tribal, Orcust can fit into this deck. And the final commander that I'm going to highlight that might want Orcust is Judith the Scourge Diva. Judith is a 2/2 human shaman for 1 black red that says other creatures you control get +1/+0. And whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. So typically Judith decks are built in aristocrat style, so you're going to be sacrificing a lot of small creatures, and yeah, again, Orcust can be pretty fantastic at getting those creatures back for you to sacrifice again. So yeah, Judith decks definitely might want to take a look at Orcust. But now as this show is wrapping up, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on Orcust, Prince of Undeath. Orcust can be a very powerful commander. Again, it's basically a board wipe in the command zone that can also reanimate a ton of creatures. And the way that I went about building around it definitely isn't the only way. But yeah, again, in my opinion, it can be really fun getting a lot of tiny creatures back, sacrificing them for a ton of value, and getting them back again to sacrifice again. So whatever way you want to build it, have fun with the overwhelming power of Undeath. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thank you again, and have a good one.